please. So the Office of Global Services is at Northeastern to assist you with various pieces involving your student visa. We also offer services related to employment authorization, social security numbers, traveling, advice, and working after graduation. We have our information here for your reference. Next slide, please. I invite my colleague, Ellen Goldman, to please talk about the Office of Career Design.
Hi, my name's Ellen Zoll-Goldman. Thanks, and I'm excited to talk with you briefly about career design. It's really important to realize that just as you'll be pivoting to a new opportunity, your career is going to undergo a lot of future changes and require lifelong learning, and we're here to help you become really good at that process of career and life design so you can be in the driver's seat of your journey. We partner with you in terms of self-assessment, helping you identify your values, your interests, your personality, and skills, and assessments ranging from strengths and strength profile, MBTI, and others. We'll also help you to tell your story effectively in resumes and cover letters and interviews, and we have a pre-law advisor, grad school advising, as well as an amazing PhD-focused career coach. In terms of the career management skills, we have recurring coaching labs, including building strategies for the international student job search, networking, and others that will run Monday through Friday from 11 to 5 Boston time, and also fall hours will be longer. And you can find those on our events calendar. We also have a drop-in career studio. That's all of our services, of course, are virtual for same-day drop-ins in any area of your job search, and help a lot with practice mock interviews, assistance in practicing how to talk with prospective employers about OPT, negotiating offers. And that's open Monday through Friday from 1:30 to 4:30 Boston time, and then Wednesdays until 7. And also you'll check fall hours because I think we're going to add a little bit more time. Take a look at the website. We have website information for international students specifically, my visa jobs, going global, resources for both the US and overseas job search, big interview, and voice analyst, which helps international students see whether you're varying your pitch enough in terms of the American style, which is helpful for interviews. And then offer international student related programs, co-sponsored with OGS, such as this one, and also with GSS and industry panels. So I think one of the takeaways is just that you have access to career services throughout your life at Northeastern, anywhere you're at in the world. We support international students, and plus the Office of Alumni Relations as well. And just remember, as you become a member of our alumni network of over 250,000 alums around the world, NUSource can help you network with other alums. So I hope you'll take full advantage of career design now and throughout your life. And now if you want to advance the slide, Attorney Patel will introduce our speaker.
While you do that, I'd like to say a special acknowledgement to our attorney, Jigisha Patel, who serves as immigration advisor for the Office of Global Services. So take it away, Jigisha. Thank you.
Thank you, Rupa. So my name is Jigisha Patel, and I'm Associate General Counsel and Chief Advisor for International and Immigration Services. I have the pleasure of working with great colleagues who are here. And in particular, I get to introduce our star speaker today, a good friend and a Northeastern alum who we love to have on our campus, and who is always there to support our community whenever needed. Leslie Detrani is co-managing partner of Chin & Curtis LLP and has been practicing immigration law for more than 25 years. Leslie is widely known as an expert in all things related to immigration, and in particular for her creativity and her dedication as she represents her clients. She's amazing, and I think everybody here is going to enjoy hearing from her, about all things immigration today. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Chiquisha. That was very, very kind of you. To start off, it is, sad that we're not literally on the Northeastern campus, because it's one of my favorite things to do is to come back home to Northeastern. But I so appreciate being welcomed back to the Northeastern community. Thank you, Chiquisha. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Rupa. It was a lot of fun prepping for this, and I'm excited to kind of share with you what's going on in the immigration world, and also answer your questions. So, I'm here for, I guess, an hour and a half. And if I don't get to your questions by the end, please email me them. I am, Northeastern's where I started. It's my roots. And if I can help a fellow Northeastern person, I am happy to do so. So let's go to our next slide.
And if I could just interject, there is a chat box to your right. And if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat.
Yeah, please do, because I love speaking to Northeastern students, but I'm looking at my computer screen. I miss seeing all your faces. So, engage with us however we can during these challenging times. So, we're going to talk about today, the H-1B visa. We're going to talk about other immigration options, including the L-1A and L-1B, and how kind of recent grads can take advantage of those. We're going to talk about H3 and J1 training visas as an alternative to the H-1B if that does not work out for you. Visitors for business, B1, sometimes are good postgraduate options. For people from Canada and Mexico, TNs are good options, and E-visas, E1 and E2s, are good options for people from particular countries, and we'll cover that. We'll spend a little time talking about O1s and employment-based, the first preference categories for foreign nationals of extraordinary ability, which I am sure they are many within our Northeastern community. Finally, we're going to talk about national interest waivers and the PERM process to green card options for entrepreneurs, because I'm sure in the audience today, there are many of you who are thinking about starting your own business, and how do we fit visas to suit that? I'd like to talk about. Also, we're going to spend some time on OPT, STEM OPT, and just regular OPT, because as people graduate, that's how you start. So next slide. I find when I speak to an audience, we do want to cover all that stuff, right? We do want to talk about what are the immigrant and non-immigrant options. What am I going to do to be able to stay and work here in the United States? But we can't do that without kind of talking about the news, because there is so much news nowadays about immigration. So we're going to talk a little bit just quickly about the COVID-related travel bans, distinct from the non-COVID related travel bans, because I'm sure some of you, especially now that we are remote, may want to travel and might have some concerns about that. And then there's been a lot of changes in with immigration law in this administration, and there's been a lot of news about the proclamations, and we expect one coming up, so we're going to talk about that and some other changes. But when it comes down to it, a lot of things have been talked about, but a lot of things really stay the same. So let's jump into the news first. Let's go to the next slide. So, wow, a pandemic. Like, it's just extraordinary times. And it's good to remember that as kind of jarring and difficult and bumpy of a transition the pandemic has had for all of us. Like our firm is remote now, and I don't think we're going back anytime soon. It's the same with the government, right? They didn't see it coming either. So we now have travel restrictions. It started off with foreign nationals who had been in China or Iran. Then that got extended to the Schengen countries, think Western Europe, the UK, Ireland, the US and Canada have certain rules, and Brazil now is also listed there. So if if you were like my children who have enough time off and are just itching to take advantage of some of the discounted airfare, there are restrictions that are still there. If you travel to one of these countries, it's hard to come back. And of course, there are exceptions, but you just need to be aware that traveling is challenging nowadays. In addition, to travel restrictions, COVID has brought to us, the closure, except for emergencies, for most consular offices. They're now beginning to open back up. And for USCIS, the immigration service within the country, they closed down as well. And they began opening up their offices with precautions to protect everyone starting on June 4th. So we are waiting to see how the backlogs are going to be dealt with. If you imagine, if you close down a consular or a USCIS office, that's 2 months of work that needs to kind of get back into the queue. So while we're going forward with our immigration processes, whether we're applying for OPT or we're applying for an H-1B or if we're applying for a visa at a consulate, we have to understand that processing times that were posted before are pre-pandemic processing times, and it really is hard to make an estimate about how long anything's going to take. Some things are happening really fast, some things are slow, and it's just important to kind of keep that in mind. So next slide. Of course, before there was even a pandemic, we had our travel bans, formerly known as the Muslim ban. Okay, now we see the downside of working remotely. My apologies. So the president has the authority under Section 212F of the Immigration and Nationality Act, to restrict the entrance to the U.S. of citizens of other countries, as long as that restriction is in the U.S. interest. So when we talk about bans, we're talking about people outside the United States not being able to go get a visa to come inside the United States. We're not talking about people who are already here. We're talking about people, if they are here, if they leave, these travel bans might apply. But this is kind of old news, but it's good to remember there's COVID-related travel bans, but they're the non-COVID-related travel bans, which include people from Iran and Libya and Somalia and Syria and Yemen and North Korea and Venezuela. And on January of this year, we added Eritrea and Myanmar and Nigeria and Kazakhstan, and also now diversity visas from Sudan and Tanzania aren't going to be going forward. So this is affected. It's expected that this year, these bans alone will restrict, I think I read it in the New York Times, it was like 12,500 immigrant visas are going to be restricted merely from the non-COVID related travel bans. So when thinking of traveling, the United States is kind of big. So maybe travel within the continental US and it might be easier. Next slide. So let's take just a few minutes and talk about what might be kind of in people's minds right now. Back on April 23rd, the president put into effect a proclamation halting the issuance of immigrant visas for 60 days, except for certain classes of people, spouses and children of U.S. citizens, EB-5 investors, that's kind of an odd, add-in, and then people who would like to come and, combat the pandemic were exempt. But otherwise, immigrant visas, green cards, were barred for 60 days. And that 60-day period is going to be up on Monday. And we're expecting kind of a proclamation to follow, because back in April, the president said, okay, we're going to stop issuing immigrant visas, but we'd like to review the non-immigrant programs and figure out how we can, affect those to protect U.S. workers. So we are all now waiting to see what the second proclamation is going to say. And it is always good at this point to kind of stop and take a deep breath. A proclamation is merely a statement by the administration, the White House, that they intend to do something. But their powers are limited, right? We're a system of 3 branches of government, the congressional, the executive, and also the judicial. So merely because the executive says it doesn't mean it happens. There is broad authority to limit visas, the issuance of visas when you're outside the United States. There's less authority to change things within the United States. And if the executive exceeds their authority, you have, I'm sure if you're following the news, have read multiple lawsuits that challenge and ultimately keep the executive in the box it's supposed to be in. So we're expecting this month, probably next week, we don't know when, to have a new proclamation. And it's expected, or it's reported, that it will ban, stop the issuance of visas for 60 days for foreign nationals outside the United States who would go to a consulate, who would want to apply for an H-1B visa. An H-1B is a professional non-immigrant workers visa. An H-2B temporary worker visa, an L-1 intercompany transferee visa, J-1s. So now that's ringing a little closer to home for a lot of us, because a lot of us at Northeastern will be on F-1s or J-1s. So this bar would be no visas for those people for 180 days. There would be, of course, exceptions. They're talking about maybe not L1As, maybe exceptions for people working in relationship to the pandemic, but the proclamation hasn't come yet, so we don't really know. So that's one thing. We hear in the news, there is going to be a proclamation. It's going to limit non-immigrant visas. And the important thing to remember there is when they say non-immigrant visas, they're talking about people outside the United States who have to go to a consulate and apply for the visa stamp in their passport. If you're here, it's not going to affect you. Also, there have been rumors, statements from people who would be in positions to know that there is going to be an announcement about proposed regulatory changes. The United States is governed by laws that then create statutes to implement the laws, and then there's regulations to implement the statutes. And then there's policy memos and memorandums to interpret the regulations. One can't just change a regulation. If the executive would like to change a regulation, they have to first give notice and then receive comments about the impact of the change, and then make a final proposed regulation. So we'll hear something in the news soon, but people should understand that this is the first of a process. And again, if the executive exceeds their authority, there will be lawsuits that will then block that back in. But the expected changes are that they would get rid of STEM OPT. And I can guarantee you, if that is what what is announced, that there will be challenges to that. H-4 EADs are also proposed to be removed, taken away, no more. They're also, the White House is talking about making restrictions on F-1 OPT, and we don't know anything more than that restrictions on F-1 OPTs. So we'll see what that is. And then finally, additional requirements for H-1B professional workers. And what I hear is a heart-stopping significant increase in fees. So that's the proposed regulatory change. We'll see what actually gets announced, and then we'll see what challenges they are. But the kind of takeaway from that is we should keep listening to the news, But remember, this doesn't mean it happens tomorrow. It means there's a process that has begun. So those are the presidential proclamations. Let's talk about what else has changed. And everyone really should know this. When you apply for a visa, the consulate now is looking at your social media. So you should be careful about what you place on your social media. That is a public platform that the government, the consular officer will look at in making determinations about whether to issue a visa. As we've seen in the news, there's been restrictions on asylum policies. Most recently, it's been, heart-wrenchingly restricted. Sharp limits on refugee admissions. There is not a TPS status that's not scheduled to expire this year or next year. We'll see if those will continue to be extended. The courts have been involved in that as well. One thing as a practitioner that we've seen is that the flow of legal immigration has been kind of restricted, and it's just because everything's taking longer. So things are slower. So, I mean, we should just be aware of that. The process is slower. The new public charge regulations, that was something that there was notice, there was comment, and we have a final regulation regarding public charge. So that is a big change. And then there was an executive order a while back by American, Hire American, BAHA, that just basically told the government agencies kind of look internally and do what you can do to protect U.S. workers. And we've seen a series of memos that have come out from the White House regarding, or from the Immigration Service regarding BAHA. One of it is the end of deference. They used to give deference to their own opinions. And now USCIS adjudicates each and every application anew like it's the first time, not giving any deference to the prior USCIS adjudication. There's an NTA memo now, so if something is denied, it can be a notice to appear to removal proceedings can be issued. And then, and this might resonate more at home, people might know more about the F and J and M unlawful presence memo that was enjoined. And I'm gonna just stop here for a little bit and kind of talk about this, because people hear about the unlawful presence memo, and it's important to understand that this was a policy that was implemented, it was challenged in court, and now there is an injunction. So this policy is not in effect. But the policy did say that if you were an F or a J or an M non-immigrant here in the United States and you violated your status, that you would start accruing something called unlawful presence on the day the violation started, whether you knew it was a violation or not. And if you have more than 6 months of unlawful presence, you trigger a 3-year bar upon returning to the United States. And if you have a year of unlawful presence, you have a 10-year bar upon returning to the United States. So you can see how that's kind of not fair, right? You're an F1 student, you did something to violate your status, you didn't even know it violated your status, and you figure out a year later, and then if you travel, you're barred from coming back for 10 years. That just, in no one's mind makes sense. And the judicial system worked, right? They saw it, they saw that as, an undue consequence, and that rule is on hold. It is enjoined, it is not in effect. So you might hear about it, but the piece to remember is it's not in effect. So lots have changed for me, right? My work is much more challenging than it has been before. But that's okay, right? I like my job, so I like a challenge. Bring it on, we can do it. Next slide, please. For you, immigration is mostly the same, right? There's still H-1Bs, there's still TNs, there's still green card processes. Processing times might be longer. You may or may not have premium processing depending if it's suspended. But things have generally been the same for employment-based immigration. But what we've seen, and it's heartbreaking, because there is so much coverage and so much talk and so much misinformation out there, that there are a lot of anxieties and concerns, and rightfully so. If I'm a foreign student in the United States and I'm reading this stuff, I'm worried too. But remember, the rules have generally stayed the same. And if you're unsure about something, check with the attorney. You always can email me, and I always can say, yes, that's right, or no, that's just proposed, or that's been stopped by the courts, or that's just a rumor. So there you go. So I'm going to take a deep breath and see if anyone has any questions before we kind of move into visa sections. And I see specific like OPT, part-time degree programs, other things. I'm not going to read through the questions because then you guys are going to just watch me read the chat. So how do we want to handle this?
I see. I see. Should a student leave the country while getting an H-1B?
Oh yeah. No. Right? And I'm an attorney, right? And an attorney wants to do is protect their client as much as possible. So maybe leaving won't be a big deal. The proposed reg right now might be an issue. So right now I'm telling my clients don't leave, right? But overall good advice I've always given is don't leave if you don't have to, right? It's not that you can't go home for a wedding or go on a vacation, but you can change status here in the United States. If you're in status, you can change your status. You can go from F or J to H without having to leave the country.
Great, thank you. And I also see a question in terms of, let's see, will the OPT extension support part-time degree study?
I'm going to kick that one back to the experts at Northeastern.
Yeah, so right now, I can speak to that, Leslie, thank you. When somebody is holding, on OPT with valid OPT, there is a restriction of not engaging in pursuing a credential, right? So there are limitations there, and what we can do is the OGS website has information that speaks to what students can do while holding OPT status. So we can share that information here.
Great.
Wonderful. One of the things that's coming up is that somebody indicated there are a lot of rumors going around that the U.S. is planning to stop offering H-1B. How true is that news? And I think you can probably also speak to OPT.
Sure. So the administration can limit H-1B visa issuances outside the country fairly easily through Section 222 or 212F of the Immigration Act. Getting rid of the H-1B visa itself, that is, in the laws, and to change a law, you need Congress, right? Or if you wanted to change a regulation, you have to go through a process. So the checks and balances are going to work out there, right? I can't imagine. I know there's been a lot of talk about restricting legal immigration in the United States, but an outright ban on a category of visas would be challenged.
Okay. Leslie, related to the idea of leaving the country, can you speak to that related to OPT? If somebody has a quick vacation and they're on a job, for example, are they able to leave the country and safely get back in?
This is a great transition to the next slide. So let's bounce over to the next slide because, traveling on F1, first of all, there, the travel restrictions. So you have to, think about the COVID-related travel restrictions and the non-COVID-related travel restrictions. But assuming that you're good there, right? No travel ban's going to hit you. Can you travel while you're on an F1? Yes, you could, but there's never a guarantee of re-entry to the United States. So, you have to look, do you have, your visa stamp? Is it for multiple entries? Is it valid? Do you have your EAD card? Have you violated any of the grounds of inadmissibility? Do you have a job that you're returning to? These are all things that one would look at, but let's I think some of this is going to be covered in the presentation. So let me kind of get through some of this, and I will do it kind of on a broad level so we can spend most of our time taking questions and answering your specific questions. So, you know, one of the questions that came up in the prep for the panel was working remotely during a pandemic. And, you know, we kind of broke that down to two things: working remotely here in the United States and also working remotely outside the United States. So if you're inside the United States, you can off-site employment is permissible under the new regulations, and students just must list the physical location of the employment on the you know, the STEM form. If they're a STEM OPT, and if not, it's okay. And the address must list where the student conducts their day-to-day duties, and it may be different from the employer's primary headquarters. It's just important to note that the DSO must put in, you know, you must let your DSO know so they can put it into the SEVIS system so everybody knows. So remote work is allowed. Remote work outside the country, you know, that's kind of interesting. If I'm an F1 student and I'm, you know, on my OPT and I'm on my STEM, and, you know, it's a pandemic, why not sit at home, you know, in my home country opposed here? And that's more of a gray area. So I'd be interested to see the development of this. Time spent outside the United States during an approved period of post-completion OPT counts as unemployment against the 90 and 150-day limits, unless a student is either employed during and in a period of authorized leave by their employer. You know, you kind of think of like, you know, medical leave or maternity leave, and the employer said, yes, you can do that. Or if the foreign national is traveling as part of their employment. So there's nothing in there about working remotely kind of in this pandemic situation. So there isn't clear guidance about whether you can pack your bags and set up shop and work on your F1 OPT STEM or regular OPT outside the country, and whether that's counting towards the 90 and 150 days. And I think in this climate, I would advise against it, just because, you know, while I'm usually not the most conservative attorney, these are times to be conservative. Let me just kind of hit towards volunteering, and then I'm going to go quickly over the H's and the E's and the O's and all the options, and then take questions so that we can kind of engage in a larger conversation. One of the questions that come in beforehand was about volunteering, which is, I think, a standard question: can I volunteer? And I think, you know, most people know that you can use qualifying volunteer work or unpaid internship to satisfy the employment requirement for the F1 OPT, but no unpaid work counts towards the STEM OPT. Jigisha, did you want to add anything to that, or did I get that right?
Oh, thank you, Leslie. Yeah, I think the question about volunteering, especially right now, you know, given the changes in the economic situation and of the U.S., and also with you know, closures that had happened where businesses were working remotely. I think the question really, you know, came up around what are the opportunities that are available. And, you know, with OPT, you know, we've seen quite a bit of flexibility, you know, being granted for allowing, you know, not requiring, for example, the minimum 20 hours of work, or, you know, other pieces that the government has acknowledged that there needs to be flexibility. So, you know, and what we always say is that the key thing is making sure that, you know, that the experience is categorized appropriately. We actually do have on our website, and we'll make sure that we share that here. There's a volunteer toolkit that was refreshed by Northeastern University, and it's available on the Office of the General Counsel website, which helps to provide, you know, template letters and information to the Northeastern community for those that are looking for opportunities for either an unpaid internship or, you know, volunteering opportunities. So, you know, highly recommend taking a look at that. in case it's helpful to anyone.
Thank you, Katisha. And I apologize. I know I put you on the spot, and everyone in the audience, we're all working remotely, so you might hear my dog, you might hear my kids. You never know what you might hear in the background in today's work environment. So apologies in advance. So next slide, H-1Bs. And then we're going to slide over to the next slide after that, because that just says H-1Bs. So the most traditional, typical process is that you graduate from school, you get your F1 OPT, and you land a job while you're on F1 OPT, and you get them to love you. You make yourself indispensable, you make yourself valuable, so that company wants to sponsor you for an H-1B, which is the most common avenue to a long-term stay in the United States. And an H-1B is a non-immigrant professional workers visa. Things about them that aren't so great: they're limited. There's only 65,000 base, an additional 20,000 petitions available for graduates from U.S. institutions with a master's degree or higher. So that means there's 85,000 non-immigrant visas available for the entire country. So that's not a whole bunch. The chances of being selected in the 2020 lottery were less than 50%. So while it's kind of the shoe that fits the best, there are not that many shoes out there to put on. You can file multiple petitions if you have multiple job offers, multiple H-1B petitions if you have multiple job offers. But if you do it for the same job with the same employer, you're going to be banned from the system. They check for that. And always surprises me, a lot of people just don't know. H's can be for part-time work. It doesn't have to be for a full-time job. So if your job employer is a smaller employer and they're not quite sure if they need you full-time, but they could use you at least part-time, that's definitely an option. Next slide. To determine if the H-1B visa is the correct visa, you have to have three things. You have to be offered a professional position. And that's been getting a lot of challenge from USCIS lately. What is a professional position? An accountant is a professional position. A bookkeeper is not. And we're doing a lot of fighting with the Immigration Service, and they're challenging about whether positions are professional. You have to have, an accounting degree, right? You can't have an art degree and say you're qualified to be an accountant. And that the company has to be offering you at least the prevailing wage or the actual wage, whichever is higher. Next slide. And we're going to bounce through these really fast so we leave time for questions and answers. Some employers don't have to worry about the cap, right? There's only 85,000 for most employers, but some employers are cap exempt. Employment by colleges or universities pursuant to that institution's policies and rules can be capped exempt. So employment by nonprofit organizations affiliated with or a college or a university are capped exempt. Employment by nonprofits or governmental research organizations. So nonprofit research organizations or governmental research organizations, not just any nonprofit. Nonprofit research organizations are capped exempt. And employment by otherwise capped subject employers, for-profit entities at a university or college. And a good example of that I did once was a daycare, for-profit daycare that was affiliated with a university. So that was at the university. Next slide. So that's cap exempt. Once you're counted against the cap, like you get your first cap H, you don't have to worry again. You are then capped. An H-1B, how much does it cost? There's a registration process now, which is great because it costs $10, and then you'll know if you're selected or not. And then only if you're selected, then you can go ahead and put in the rest. $460 base fee, training fee can be $750 or $1,500 depending on the size of the company. Everyone has to pay for the first time when you're filing an H, a fraud detection fee. And if it's not suspended, which sometimes it is, there's what I call the legal bribe in the United States. The U.S. Immigration Service will do your case for $1,410 within 2 weeks, and everyone else can wait months. That was suspended, but it's coming back now. And then these fees mostly are paid by the employer. There's limited circumstances that some of them can be passed on to the foreign national. And then again, the same thing with the lawyer's fees. Mostly it has to be paid by the employer. Limited circumstances, it can be absorbed by the foreign national. But the foreign national works both for the company, and there is a fiduciary duty to the applicant as well. So that lawyer should be sharing information with you as well. Next slide. I'm loving the time it takes to switch slides. It gives me a chance to not, speed talk. So one thing that it's really important to watch out, H-1Bs, you're not allowed to bench. Like an employer can't say, oh, sorry, I don't have work for you, so I'm not going to pay you. Just sit there and I'll call you up when I do have work for you. That's benching, and that's not allowed. So if an employer does that, call an attorney, because the attorney will get your wages because it's a requirement. We talked about the fees, limited circumstances that can be switched to the foreign national applicant. We talked about how once you finally get CAP counted, that's it. You can transfer to other CAP subject cases and you don't have to be counted again. So it's really important to get that at least once. You can port from one H-1B employer to another, right? Once you have one, you can go through the process. You can even start work before it's approved as long as it's filed. So that makes transferring easier. You can have multiple H-1Bs. You can have a couple of part-time jobs. You can have a full-time job and a part-time job. But you have to have an H-1B for each specific employer. And then some of you might look down at your F1 EAD card, your OPT EAD card, and see there's an expiration date to it. That's probably not October 1st. It's probably sometime before then. OPTs are granted, first for 1 year, and if it's STEM, you get another 2 years. If your OPT is going to run out, your F1 OPT, before your H-1B is going to be activated because they become available on October 1st. There's something called the gap cap. So you can extend your EAD for that period, and you don't have to have some unemployment time, because employers really don't like to have employees just all of a sudden have to stop working for a month or two while they wait for the H-1B visas to be released. Let's go to the next slide.
Leslie, may I ask, would you define benchmarking versus furlough? And then just a very basic question came through in terms of like, what does it mean to be, not in status or out of status, whatnot, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, great question. So furloughed, laid off, if you do not have an active employer-employee relationship where you are providing services and you are getting paid, then you are not working. And if you are not working, you cannot be in H status. That would be a status violation. So if your employer furloughs you or terminates you, their furlough means I'd like to bring you back, but it doesn't help the H-1B worker all that much, because it means that they now have started their 60-day grace period. And after the 60 days, if there's not another visa status or age to go into, the foreign national has to leave the United States. Benching, the same thing, right? You can't bench and say, just sit there and wait, right? The H-1B means you have to have an employer-employee active relationship going where you are actively providing services and getting paid. You can even take it as far, and we're seeing it a lot in today's economy, where employers don't have work but are continuing to have people on payroll. All the PPP loans have come through, so they're keeping people on payroll, but they don't have operations. And, our view is that's not work, because the foreign national is not providing services, and it's services in exchange for, remuneration, which is the key for the H-1B relationship.
Thank you.
So as I said, there's an electronic registration process now, and it worked out really well. None of us expected that. It was a huge change for the government, and they pulled it off. So now there is not having to prepare a full H-1B only to not be selected in the lottery. Now you can do a minimal registration with a minimal fee of $10 and find out if you're selected and then prepare the application. Let's go on to the next slide. So the way it usually works is you F1 OPT and then you apply for an H. But now the dynamics are F1 OPT and then you apply for an H, and half of you aren't selected. So then we have to talk about other visa options for those people who weren't selected, so that people can go back into the H-1B lottery, because the H-1B, if once selected, will get you here in the United States for 6 years, and then immigrant visas can flow from that. So now the conversation goes to the H-1B is the shoe designed to keep professional workers here in the United States. There are not enough of those shoes. So now we're talking about shoes that don't fit quite so well. So let's see, what's the first slide? For employers with foreign offices, so the parent company is here and a subsidiary is abroad, or vice versa, or their affiliated companies. If you've worked for a company abroad within the last 3 years, and you've worked for them for more than a year, then you may be eligible for an L1A managerial executive intercompany transferee, or an L1B specialized knowledge intercompany transferee. Note, if you are taking notes, proclamation that's expected out next week will limit visa stamps. The ability to come into the United States in L1B does not apply to people still here. So for everyone in the audience, 417 of you, for those of you who have worked outside the United States for a full year before coming to the United States, L is an option to consider if you can work for a parent, subsidiary, or branch of that foreign entity. I represent a large international company that has offices around the world. They have employees on F1 OPTs, and at the end, if they were not selected in the H-1B lottery, the company thinks, you know what, I really like this foreign national, they are valuable to me, I am going to train them and then put them in my Canadian office or my London office. And then I can apply for maybe a J1 training visa or an H3 training visa. Again, J1 proclamation, there might be a 6-month ban on the visa stamp, but not on the status. And finally, just a plain old visitor for business, right? If you're employed abroad, you're being paid abroad, if the work that you do, the benefit of that goes back to being abroad and you could be anywhere, maybe you could come in on a B1 visitor. You can visit and train, you can visit and look at US offices. There's lots that you can do on a B1. So these are some options that we start talking to people about if the H-1B didn't quite fit, or we weren't selected in the lottery. Next slide. So, see, if you were all in front of me, I would say raise your hand if you're from Canada or Mexico, because you are lucky, because we have trade NAFTA, which allows people who have job offers in the list of qualifying occupations, which you can, just Google, NAFTA TN professions, and it'll come up. And if you're being offered one of those jobs and you have the qualifications for that job, you can apply for a TN. And right now, the border between Canada and US and Mexico and the US is restricted. But once that opens back up for Canadians, they can apply at the border. They are good for 3 years. They can be extended indefinitely. They're really nice visas. They have non-immigrant intent like Fs, but all in all, a really nice option if you're from Mexico and Canada. Maybe such a better option than even the H-1B, that you don't even try for the H-1B lottery. And then e-visas are kind of interesting. I really like e-visas. E-visas are for treaty traders or treaty investors, or the employees of treaty trader or treaty investor companies, essential skills employees. So let's go to the next slide. It'll make a little more sense when you see the map. And this map might be dated, so feel free to Google, e-treaty countries, and you'll come up with a nice list, but PowerPoint's like graphics, so we're going to use this. If you are from one of those countries, let me go ahead and look in carefully, and you wanted to start a business because you're an entrepreneur, you could invest a substantial amount, have an economic impact, and then apply for an E and be able to stay in the United States with an E visa, and they're renewable indefinite. There's no limit, so that's kind of nice. Or if you have a country, I know Italy is on the list because I recently did one from Italy. It's an Italian-owned company, 51% Italian-owned, and you're Italian too. First, you're from a great place, what wonderful food. But if you decide to stay here, that company could sponsor you for an E2 essential skills employee. So this is another option to think about if the H-1B didn't work out in that lottery. Flip it on to the next page. Foreign nationals of extraordinary ability. This is my favorite thing to talk about now. I used to tell people, this is not what your mother thinks of you, right? This visa, the O1, which is the non-immigrant visa option, or the green card option, the EB1A, which is the immigrant visa category, the green card category, are for people who can show that they have risen to the top of their field. And I used to spend a lot of time talking to people about how that's not the top of their field. They just graduated from college. How could you be at the top of your field? You're just starting out. And the Immigration Service was kind of, feeling the same way. These cases were hard to win. But USCIS officers are people too, right? They're the people who work these jobs at the government for a long time. Administrations come and go, and the waves, adjudication trends come and go. But our USCIS civil servants are still there doing the job. And I have found that where the government can use its discretion, they've been using it well lately. And they have discretion in these categories. So if you happen to be humble, now is the time not to be so humble and think bigger. How could we describe your qualifications in a larger sense? And to see if maybe an O or an EB1A would be an option. An O, you need to have an employer. You can't do it by yourself. But an EB1A, if you're really at the top, you can. Yeah, I see that chat. We'll talk about that later. Everyone else, don't look at that chat. That's scary there. Let's switch a slide. So those are the most common non-immigrant visa options, but in today's difficulty in getting through the H-1B lottery, sometimes we start right to employment-based preference category. So you go right for the green card. So EB1 is for priority workers, EB2s are for national interest waivers, employment-based third categories are for professional workers, PERM, we're gonna talk more about that. EB4 are for special immigrants, think religious workers. EB5, if you have now, I forget, they just raised the limit, but more than $1 million and you invest and create 10 jobs, one of those visas is available to you. Let's go to the next slide. And then when all else fails, because you've been in the United States for a bunch of years, you may be dating a US citizen and maybe you plan on getting married. So if you marry a US citizen, that still by far is the easiest and fastest way to get a green card in the United States. But if you're not marrying a citizen, these other relationships, brothers and sisters, married sons and daughters of citizens, unmarried sons and daughters of citizens, spouses and children, and unmarried sons and daughters of permanent residents, all are available to apply for an immigrant visa, but they're very, very long waiting lists. So none of that's going to help you. The only thing that's going to help is if you are marrying a US citizen or if you are the parent of a US citizen who is over 21. Next slide. I am committed to stopping talking at 3 o'clock, so we have a full half an hour for questions. Green card options. So we talked about the EB-1A, Foreign National Extraordinary Ability. National interest waivers are like EB-1A. It's for people who are critical to work that's in the national interest. So it's really good for researchers and scientists. I'm doing a project. The project doesn't go forward without me. The project is going to, have this impact on the country as a whole. That's a great case, but we also can be creative. And then the typical labor certification test. If we can show there's no qualified U.S. workers ready, willing, and able to do the job, which we still can do in a recession, it is still possible. We can then get an immigrant visa and then a green card. They are backlogs, significant backlogs for foreign nationals from China, India, Philippines, Mexico. So we just need to be aware of that. And then the diversity lottery lives on, right? Almost 4 years in an administration that talked in the very beginning about getting rid of the diversity lottery, and it still lives today. I think the diversity lottery is what makes America great. Our country looks around and says, oh, you know what? We don't have enough people from this country or that country or this region. And we set aside 50,000 visas every year, and we just have a lottery for them. So it comes out in the fall. If someone, if you're paying money to get into the lottery, you're getting scammed. It's an online process that costs no money. And if you're selected, you've got a year and you can get the visa. You have to have at least 2 years of work experience or a high school diploma or a degree. I'd have to go back and look, I'm forgetting. But it is still here and alive. Next slide. Okay, and then just kind of to end on, we talked a little bit about entrepreneurs, and we talked about the E being really good for an entrepreneur, but the L, the TN, and the H-1B all could be used in an entrepreneurial situation for someone who wants to start their own business. The key is for an L, a TN, an H-1B, there has to be an employer-employee relationship. So I'm an entrepreneur. I started my own business. I incorporated my business. That business now with its own legal entity, I maybe have a board of directors or an advisory board. And then I have the job of operations manager. That's a job. My board of directors can tell me what to do. I have to report back to them. That's an employee-employer relationship. So that would work. And maybe for that operations manager, I can sponsor myself for an H or an L. A TN, it has to be a listed position. So maybe I'm the marketing specialist or an engineer working for the company. But they are options for entrepreneurs. We just have to take the existing visas and fit it for the particular circumstances. So, whew, that was a lot of information.
Thank you, Leslie. I am going to ask you just to pick up, I've been reading the questions and very interesting questions that have come in. And I think one that comes up quite a bit in relation to, the concerns about the new public charge, requirements and, the stimulus payments that people might have received. Can you speak to if you received a stimulus check and you're holding either OPT status or another immigration status, should you be concerned about taking that payment, and is there an impact on your immigration status?
I'd like those people to email me and let me do a little more research, because I don't know the full answer to it. Kind of the broad answer is, if the government gave you a check, it doesn't mean that you're likely to become a public charge, right? It doesn't equate to a public charge determination, but I don't know enough about the stimulus payments to know the answer to that, but I am happy to look that up. Actually, we do a blog at Chin & Curtis, and we're always looking for blog topics. So I'm going to guarantee you that's our blog topic for July.
So it's a really interesting question in terms of, sometimes I know with how these payments have gone out that people didn't even know that they were going to receive a check and then it just shows up, right? So I think that would be great as a follow-up. And whoever submitted that question, if there's any particulars, please feel free to reach out with more specifics, but that would be helpful because it is, I'm sure people have many questions about that. One, what do you do with the check if you just had one arrive in the mail? And, what are the potential implications?
Right? If you file your taxes online and it's all electronic things, some of these checks, payments just came up into people's bank accounts. Like there was no ability to cash your check because it just showed up in an account.
It just showed up. Yeah.
But, if there were any negative consequences, I mean, wouldn't you love to take on that lawsuit? Like, dear judge, how could you punish me? I didn't do anything.
Yes, exactly. That's a great question. I think definitely one that's good to follow and very, like you said, Leslie, will be interesting to see how that plays out as people, learn more about that. The other question, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I usually end for Northeastern students and only Northeastern students. And I'm sorry, I was so cognizant of the time because I know there's so many questions that I didn't stop and say, it's a recession. Oh, right? What a horrible time to graduate. And visas are more difficult than maybe they've been in the past, or they're more challenging at least. But you're Northeastern students, right? And you chose Northeastern for a reason. It's got the co-op program, right? It's got lots of other good reasons to choose Northeastern, but what makes Northeastern particularly unique and a special place is its co-op program. And employers know this. Like, we're a 40-person law firm. We know it. When you hire someone out of school, looking at a candidate that is just out of school and has spent 4 years doing their thing, and looking at a candidate that's been through a co-op program and has had the work experience, Northeastern students are at a particular advantage than graduates from other universities. And in a recession, when there are more workers than there are jobs than it was in the past, the specialized skills and training that people are able to obtain in their co-ops really, gives them a leg up on other people. So I wanted to stop by saying, if I were graduating and I've got a son at Northeastern who's going to be graduating next year, and there's a little bit of like, this is not the market I wanted to jump into. Northeastern's the best place to be graduating into the market that we're graduating into. And I'm sure with some, perseverance, everyone's going to, all 390 of you are going to do just fine.
Thanks, Leslie. And I know some of the questions here are talking about, whether they're currently holding an H-1B status or, have OPT and they would like to pursue, further studies. Can they do that in the US? When you spoke about status versus questions that are coming in are, focused on if there's any potential suspensions on entry. So speaking about options, and I think you already touched on it, as if you're holding valid status in the US right now, you really don't need to leave the US. And it's really important that you not lose any time to explore your options to either change status or, take action while you're holding valid status. And as Leslie said, we often see, especially right now, the government is, given the current travel restrictions and because of COVID, they are being lenient, even if there are some delays in filing, right? Leslie, you're seeing that too?
Yes,
so
especially with COVID, we're filing lots of, well, first of all, some of the deadlines have been automatically extended for 60 days. So the government's giving us a little more time. But, we have filed many exceptions to filing for a change of status on time due to pandemic concerns. People have been sick, people haven't been able to travel, people thought they could travel and then couldn't and found themselves out of status. So we're waiting to see how the government adjudicates them, but it's a really good reason.
Yeah, and you know, if for anybody currently listening that, you know, if you currently have F1 status, right, or an active SEVIS record, then please do definitely reach out to OGS and speak to an advisor, because they are in the best position to look at your SEVIS record and let you know what options might be available to you, especially if, you know, you thought you were going, you know, or you're on OPT and you'd like to pursue you know, do a change of degree level and, you know, continue studies, that there are options that, you know, that they can assist you with. Rupa, I don't know if you want to speak more to that, not to put you on the spot, but I'm seeing quite a bit of questions about, you know, being eligible to study coming in as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think the best advice that you gave, I think, Jigisha, I will endorse, is to contact an advisor, because these are case-specific questions. We do not want to take the risk of giving any broad advice that could potentially be misunderstood and lead to any missteps. We are here for our students. We have dedicated advisors responding to emails. We are experiencing a slightly high volume of communication, but that is because our students are paying attention and asking questions. So please reach out. We're happy to help. Thank you, Jigisha.
Yeah, and I would say that the team does a wonderful job with presentations that they host, webinars that they host for, you know, on more specific detailed topics for students. There's also quite a bit of information on the website. So, you know, please definitely look at all of those resources. And then for case specific, you know, definitely reach out to an advisor, because they have to look at your record in responding. There, you know, there are limitations while you're on OPT, unless you're, you know, changing to receive an updated I-20 for studies, right? To enroll in a new program of study. There are limits on what you can do. And your eligibility to be enrolled in a program of study while holding OPT. OPT is really, that time period is there for practical training, not for study. So I know that there's quite a few questions about that came in. Leslie, another one I know we talk about often is working with congressional offices, right, for assistance. So we know, and you touched on this, as there's a lot of, you know, that things are delayed. We're hearing in the news that there might be further delays, right, if USCIS doesn't receive the funding that they need, right, to continue their operations. You know, there's, you know, can you speak to that a little bit? Because I think sometimes people are, you know, are unsure whether they should seek assistance, if their employer is in one location versus where they live, you know, where should they, you know, who should they approach and how should they go about it?
Yeah, you know, congressional liaisons are wonderful people. Each congressional office in the New England delegation has a staffer or more dedicated to deal with problems with USCIS. And of course, they're interested in helping their constituents. So it's usually, you know, the employer who would be the constituent. You know, whoever can vote is usually the congressional constituent. But, you know, they understand the circumstances. So even if, you know, you're a foreign student in the United States and, you know, for example, you apply for reinstatement and it's taking, you know, beyond reasonable processing times, it does not hurt to call up whatever congressional office may be within your district and explain the situation and ask if they can help. Their job is to be the liaison between USCIS and the public. So they, you know, can reach out and USCIS does get back to them. And they can't, you know, sway an officer to make a decision one way or another, but they can help get the USCIS to pay attention to a case and give you an answer, which may be great. We'll get to it right away and let you know, or, you know, no, sorry, it's in the backlogs and you'll have to wait more. But it's definitely a good avenue to seek.
Great. And, you know, I'll just put this out there too, that Northeastern does have a government relations office, and so you can always, you know, reach out, you know, always to OGS but also our government relations office is phenomenal and has, will do everything to support the Northeastern community. Sometimes it's just putting you in touch with the, the representative that might, and the right contacts that, within the offices that can assist. But yeah, they're wonderful. And so I would recommend, really looking to all of the university resources too, and how they might be able to support you. And sometimes it just raises issues that we can help in, advocating for generally as well. So I'll mention, I think we've got the next slide, I believe, is resources, but we do have a dedicated website at Northeastern for immigration policy and changes, and to, highlight all of the work that we do at Northeastern with our partners and collaborators. And that is, the website is northeastern.edu/executive-orders. It's also linked here with the presentation slides. But that has, each office that, can be a resource. Internally and external resources are listed there. We have a lot of the things that we've done to advocate on behalf of our international community are posted there, as well as on the OGS website. So definitely recommend taking a look at all of those.
So I see lots of questions have popped in, so let me know how we should handle these.
There are a couple of questions just in broad themes with the citations for our PhD students in the audience, and also master students who might have citations. Just in general, are there rules in terms of like the number of citations somebody has to have? Like, for example, somebody posted about the EB2, it might also be the O. Anything that you want to speak to with that?
Sure. I get that question all the time. How many citations? How many letters of reference? What is the bare minimum to get in the door? And if you kind of Google EB1A or NIWs or O1s, it will come up with the list of things that you have to do, and you have to hit like 3 of them. There is no particular number of citations that are required. There is no required number of letters of reference. It's about telling a story and communicating with the immigration officer why you meet the criteria. And at Chin & Curtis, the way we do this is very particular. USCIS officers are people, right? And you have to think about who's your audience. And there are people who sit in cubicles with big files next to them, and they have to move that pile. And USCIS officers get evaluated by how much work product they move through. So you want to be able to connect with that person and explain your story in a very clear and concise manner so they can understand. So I did once a national interest waiver case for a mortgage broker with no citations and no publications, but a whole bunch of really good letters of reference and some awards. She specialized in bringing families back to a neighborhood that was devastated by the mortgage scam crisis, and everything collapsed, and half the houses went into bankruptcy, and it was all boarded up, and it was just horrendous. And she worked with getting their families back into those houses through this special program that was a pilot program that was going to go across the nation. And we got letters from the mayor, from the Mortgage Brokers Association, from the daughter who got to go back to her house. And that person now has a green card because we were able to tell a story that someone could understand about why what that person did was unique and was in the national interest. So when people ask me how many letters of reference or how many citations, it's really not about that. Is write to me in a couple of paragraphs why what you do is important, and give me goosebumps, like really give me the heart behind what you're doing, and then we can build from there.
I really appreciate that. That's super helpful. There are some questions around like, What are the chances of EB versus H-1B? And also, do you need a different H every time you go to a different employer?
Yes, you do need a different H every time you go to a different employer, because an H-1B is tied to a job title, a job location, and a job salary. So if you move locations and that's not listed, you need to amend the H. If you get promoted within the same company to a different job, that needs a new H. If you switch to another company, same job, same salary, but new company, that needs a new H. So that's unfortunate. Because that's a burden, right? That's a restriction on trade, which, I mean, all the restrictions that we're seeing coming out of the administration, it's really counterproductive, because we know we're in a recession and we know our economy needs to start up again. But if you look out of the Fortune 500 companies, I think it's above 40%, it's below 50. I forget exactly, it's like 42% of them were started by immigrants or children of immigrants. So these processes where we're making it more difficult for foreign nationals to succeed in the United States is just going to stunt the growth that the United States needs, particularly now during a recession. So for H-1Bs, unfortunately, there's that extra barrier. You have to do a new H for each one. Compare that to, what was the EB you said?
Yes, yeah.
So employment-based, like an employment-based green card, like an EB2 or EB3, like a perm case. In the good old days, and Jigisha and I will remember back when you could just do an H and they get it, and then after a couple of years you would do a green card, and you can start down that path. It made so much sense. Now you're going in an H-1B lottery year after year after year. Well, if you're on a STEM OPT, you got 3 years, and you're not from India or China or Mexico or the Philippines or one of the backlog countries, I can get you a green card within 2 years by the perm process. It's more expensive, it's time consuming, companies usually just jump in there, but it's definitely a conversation worth having.
That's really, really helpful. And I see a number of questions in the chat that are focused on, if I work on a project, would that be a violation of status? I would just definitely encourage folks to contact OGS for anything related to your current F1, because I think that's going to be really, really helpful. I know they're very helpful. One of the questions that came up is STEM OPT extension, like will it stay or will it go?
So if you're on a STEM OPT, I cannot imagine a universe that a regulation could take away a benefit that has already been granted. So I think to start off with, if you already have it, just sit tight, right? The president isn't talking to you. It's for future STEM OPT that is rumored to be a proposed notice and comment to remove it. Let's stay tuned. Next week we will hear more. Once we see that it's, like for example, H4 EADs and restrictions on STEM OPT, this administration has been talking about since the very beginning, and nothing has been engaged. So, now we're hearing some more talk about it. Maybe there will be a proposed rule, and when we see the proposed rule, then we can comment on it. But for now, if you have it, don't worry about it. And if you're going to need it in a couple of years because you're still in school, stay tuned, right? This is the time where people need lawyers. I feel like I've got the white hat, right? I don't do the federal court litigation, but hats off to the attorneys who are challenging the administration. Every time they turn around and try to do something beyond the scope of their authority.
Leslie, can you also just speak to, I think some of the questions talk about what can individuals do versus what their employer has to do. So if someone's looking for H-1B sponsorship, who can file that, and what can the individual do? And a follow-up to that is, what are you hearing from employers? Are immigration firms or immigration lawyers still as busy as ever? And, is hiring still continuing or sponsorship filing still happening?
Yes. right? No, it's a recession. I mean, we can't pretend that's not happening. But, and if you are, in, restaurant management or in the leisure industry, chances are things aren't going to work out. But the recession's not hitting all industries equally, right? We're all working remotely. If you're in a field that has to, like, let's all go work for Zoom or WebEx, right? I mean, they've got more work than they know what to do with. So there's some industries that, because of the circumstances, they're busier, right? So people are still hiring. Not all industries. Yes, a company would probably turn to, if they had two equal candidates, they didn't have to bother doing the visa sponsorship. But companies all the time go through the effort of visa sponsorship because the foreign national holds the skill set that they need. And that's where Northeastern grads kind of come in a leg up, right? Everyone else comes out of school without much of a resume, and Northeastern grads come out with skills. And if your employer needs that skill, they'll make the effort to sponsor you. Sponsorship is employer driven. A foreign national cannot sponsor themselves for an H-1B. Companies, it usually comes up, there's usually a recruitment question that asks, do you have unrestricted authorization to work in the United States? F1 is time restricted, so you have to answer no, and that starts the question. Larger companies have policies. Some very large companies handle it in-house. Some other companies have relationships with attorneys. We represent a lot of companies where we are the only ones doing their immigration work, and they will tell you what to do. We also represent lots of small entrepreneurs and startup shops who have no idea about this immigration process. And at that point, you might be asked to do a little more of the research, like, what is the process? How do I do that? Who do I use? What is the information? So it kind of just depends on the employer, but ultimately it's an employer-sponsored petition. Foreign nationals can't start the process.
And just speaking from career design, we're helping a lot of students with a job search, and we definitely are seeing international students doing interviewing, going through second, third, fourth rounds. So while it's a recession, I just totally agree with your comments. Northeastern students, of all the learners out there, are probably best positioned. I know there are some questions about just kind of along the theme of, if you apply for one type of visa, does that jeopardize your chances to be picked for the H-1B? Or if you get the diversity, is that what do you do when you have multiple options? Can you
take
speak
advantage
to that?
of all of them, right? If you've got lots of things that you can do, let's do all of them. If you won the DV lottery, hooray, right? Go for that. But you have to wait till your number gets current. So in the meantime, go right ahead. There is nothing inconsistent with pursuing an immigrant visa through a DV lottery, or a family-based sponsorship, or even an employment-based sponsorship, and, for example, an H-1B. There is an inconsistency when you're talking about visas like F1s. You all remember, if you're on an F1 student visa, when you applied, you have to show that you had ties to your home country, that you're going to return at the completion of your studies. TNs are like that. You have to show that at the end of your TN, you plan on going home. So if you have an immigrant visa petition going on and you're applying for a TN, there's a contradiction that could be explained, right? You could apply for the DV lottery, and the chances of winning that are so small. Like, does that really show non-immigrant or immigrant intent? My argument would be no. Or you could consular process it and not do it in the United States. So if you leave and do the process at the end outside the United States, that's not, that's complying with your visa requirements. So it's about knowing the status you're on. F1s have strong non-immigrant intent. H1s, Ls have dual intent. You can intend to do both, and there's no inconsistency in the law. So it's just kind of knowing the status. But I would say in these times, I would pursue all the avenues I had.
That's really, really helpful. Someone had flagged the kind of hearing that if you are from Mexico or Canada, that you're not going to be able to get back and forth right now, correct? Or
Yeah, they're only allowing essential services through. And being in New England, I don't hear a lot of the chatter on the southern border. I know that essential services out in like the western ports seems to be business as usual, that everyone's making a claim to be essential and it's getting through. So TNs, in the Washington area seem to be going just fine. And here in the New England border states and Maine and Vermont, that's not the case, that essential services, that's a real argument for that. I also don't think the COVID related travel bans are going to last forever. So if you don't need to travel, there's always changing your status here in the United States. Always the default, right? The problem with talking to lawyers is like, what we hear are the horror stories. People go through their processes and, most people have no problems. But when it goes badly, they call the lawyer. So I hear about all sorts of horrendous situations. So we get a little skittish. So I always advise, if you don't have to travel, don't. If it's an important reason, if it's a holiday or a graduation or a wedding, let's work it out. But if it's like, I want a vacation, why take the risk? Because it's never a guarantee to re-enter. It's always a discretionary admission by CBP officers.
Leslie, thank you. I echo that. Whenever I am communicating with a student, I always will say, particularly in this current climate, if you don't have to travel, hold off, wait and see how things play out, and then by all means travel. But if it's not essential, just hang tight and avoid traveling if you can.
Yeah, I mean, remember the first Muslim ban that came out? It was like no one saw it coming. It was like boom, all of a sudden it was there, right? So
yeah, the notice period may not be long. Yeah, and I just wanted to add a plug here for for our community to please use please register travel if you are traveling, so that we can try to provide supports or resources to you. Alerts can be shared. I think it's important that, if there are reasons where travel is necessary, right, and must be taken, whether for work or personal reasons, to travel smart, right, and make sure that, as Leslie shared, that we know CBP, Customs and Border Protection, does look at admission eligibility, where someone is admissible to the United States, regardless of whether you have a visa. The view is that the visa stamp is just a ticket to arrive, right? And then you're reviewed for admissibility. So you want to make sure that you're well prepared for any questions that may be asked. If there's going to be, devices are going to be checked, that that you're well prepared for that, and that you're able to answer any questions. And the biggest thing is that with information that's shared between what might be submitted at a consulate versus what's submitted as part of an immigration application, right, to USCIS, want to be consistent and not have any flags that get raised that then raise questions on entry as well.
Well said. Yeah.
there was a question, and I think it could cover many different areas, about COVID-19 and is that impacting processing time for various things?
It's really surprising. I mean, what I was telling everyone was it's slowing everything down, right? 2 months of backlog stuff is just piling up because, USCIS officers couldn't get into the office. But what we are seeing is things that were filed after are coming through really fast. And I think there must have been like some streamlining put in place when people started working remotely. So things that happen after the shutdown are being processed. But it's different. It's not consistent. It's different for region. It's different by office. Different by petition type. By consulates. Really, when people talk about processing times, it's really guesstimates. We're really just guessing based on what happened in the past, and what's happened in the past has been so erratic. There is no. If someone says it should take this, they're really, hoping. It's not a. It's gonna.
That's so interesting. No rhyme or reason. That's so interesting. I really appreciate hearing that, and I think folks in the audience really appreciate kind of having that check on things. There was a final, I guess there might be time for one final question, which is folks are interested, can they work remotely for co-op within the States, for H1, I'm going to also say H1B. Can you speak to the remote piece?
Yes, I most definitely can. I'm gonna go, because I looked this up before I got on, so I'm gonna go back to my slide. So for H1B working remotely, it's it's like a 50-mile rule. I'll have to look that up again. But one can work without having to amend the H1B petition if it's within normal commuting distance of the place of employment, which is 50 miles. So I think that's pretty much everyone, right? You know, if no one's living outside that zone. So you have to post the LCA, you have to notice, which is kind of silly. I'm posting my LCA in my house. Who's going to see it? You know, my spouse, my child. But you post and then you're fine. If you're outside of that 50-mile limit to your workplace, and that was not a listed location on your H1B, then you do have to amend. So that's too bad. For people on OPT, offsite employment is permissible. Students must list the physical location of where the employment is going to take place if they're on the STEM OPT on the training plan, the I-983. And it can be different, of course, from the primary place of employment. But what needs to go down is where the physical location is. And you guys can correct me if I have this wrong, but I understand that the foreign national, if they're going to be working remotely, they have to then report it to their DSO, so that can be reported to SEVIS. So if there's ever an investigation, they know where to look.
Yes, OGS has sent out a survey to students to let us know. With co-ops, our students are also updating us for their CPT updates to make sure that we are aware. So if students report to us, take a look at the website, take a look at the COVID FAQs, folks. On the OGS website, it's under popular articles, and we've provided instructions on how to update us, and then we'll take it from there.
And we've also done, on the Chin and Curtis website, we have a COVID-related blog page. So, you know, kind of every different kind of topic related to COVID and travel or H1B and remote work. There's some resources there. So the answer to the question about H1B and working, there's more clarity if you want to look there.
And you can subscribe to the Chin and Curtis blog, which I already did. So here's a plug. Go ahead and sign up and it'll show up in your mailbox.
And your stimulus payment violation of status blog is coming in July. You know, send me requests. If you guys want a blog on a topic, you know, I've got 13 attorneys and we generate 2 blogs a month, and we would really love to hear what you would like to, you know about. And we will do the research and we will write it up and we will then deliver it to you.
You are such a wonderful, wonderful alumna. Thank you very much, Leslie.
My pleasure. I love Northeastern.
Well, that's my cue to thank everyone here. Ellen Zoll-Goldman, Jigisha Patel, Leslie Dechani, our special guest today. Thank you so much for taking the time and your warmth and your humanistic approach to what is an anxiety-inducing situation for many, many individuals. Thank you very much. You will certainly hear from us. I'd also like to say thank you to Monica Rodriguez from OGS, who has been our behind-the-scenes slide mover forwarder. So thank you very much. This was a great conversation to have had. And folks, please stay tuned. We will be working on part 2 of this discussion, soon to be delivered. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here. Really appreciated being invited and being able to speak with everyone.